Okay, Dad. So last time we were talking, you said that you didn't think Iran would retaliate after the Israel struck the Iranian. It was actually the consulate in Syria. Do you still believe that? Do you think there will be a retaliation? Because I'm hearing some chatter now that Iran says it's going to take some type of action.
Yeah, well, I think actually the Iranian government has declared that it will retaliate. And I've also heard that the supreme leader of Iran has instructed the government to retaliate. Now, so yeah, I believe they will, but they'll take just based on Iran's past actions in similar circumstances. They will take their time, and they will also their response will be measured, will be limited. I think that they understand quite well that Israel is trying to set a trap for them, wants to draw them into a conflict, with the U.S., and that's something that Iran is trying to avoid. So I think that they will retaliate in some form. It'll be in a way that probably will fall short of triggering a full-scale war.
So what does that mean? What is a measured retaliation? What is a measured
I don't
response?
know. Well, I guess you can look at an example of that, of what happened after the assassination attempt. I think last time I incorrectly said it was in 2015. It was actually January of 2020, just a few days before the famous January 6th incident. But that's a whole separate issue. Trump ordered the assassination of General Soleimani, who was a very important figure, perhaps the second most powerful man in Iran, and a hero to most Iranians too. And Iran retaliated. They retaliated by firing missiles, as I said, at American military bases, but they gave warning ahead of time, and they were careful actually not to strike barracks. So they did cause damage. They demonstrated the advanced nature of their technology, of their missiles. But they didn't go so far as to draw against, to provoke even a stronger response from the U.S.
So it's kind of like what the U.S. did with that attack that killed 3 U.S. soldiers in Syria, Jordan. We just bombed a bunch of sort of empty bases. We gave a warning ahead of time that we're doing this. So it's kind of more of a PR stunt, you think, is what's going to be done, something to kind of appease the Iranian population, that we are doing some retaliation, but it won't be anything actually serious. They're not going to try to strike any Israeli, military bases or...
Right. And again, another mistake. Last time I mentioned that I described it as a military headquarters that was struck by the Israelis, but it was a consulate, which is actually a much more serious affair. I guess, a proportionate response would be to, for example, strike an Israeli consulate on foreign soil somewhere.
You don't think that would happen?
But I don't think it would. It's just they're not that reckless. You could say that that's fair, that's just, but they have to, They understand again that they have to do what is good for Iran in the long term, and that is at the present time it is to avoid war with Israel and the U.S. I mean, they could actually come out on top in such a war, but it would be it would devastate Iran, and Iran is just only now recovering after many years of sanctions, and it's something that they very much want to avoid.
Does Israel have military bases stationed throughout the Middle East? I mean, I know the United States does. So in a retaliation, if they were going to strike something, they don't have like an illegal base like we do in Iraq that they could strike. Yeah. Unless they would strike the United States. But that doesn't, to me, it seems like the most plausible targets would be targets like our illegal bases in Iraq or Afghanistan, Syria. But we didn't know about this attack. At least we say so, and I don't think we did. It seems like Israel acted on their own. Right. So does this mean that Iran would strike within Israel proper itself?
I think that's what they would have to do. If they're going to strike Israeli military bases, they would have to do that.
Has that happened before? Has anybody actually struck within Iran itself?
Within Iran?
Within Israel itself?
I think you could probably the only force that you could point to that's carried out that kind of operation is Hezbollah. They have struck. I know they have struck military installations just in the last few months. After October 7th in northern Israel, and they're known to have the capability to strike military bases throughout Israel. And actually, because of those strikes, or at least in part because of those strikes, Israel has evacuated the entire civilian population from the northern part of Israel.
Do you think it'd be more likely that these strikes would be carried out by Iran itself or through somebody like Hezbollah that Iran backs? Because if Hezbollah has already struck within Israel and they've had a war with Israel before, right? There was a skirmish between Hezbollah and Israel, in 2014 or something? That Israel actually lost, right?
Yeah, well, there's one in 2006.
2006.
Okay. Yeah, there may have been, I'm sure there have been skirmishes since then, but I think that was the last major conflict between them. That Israel went into Lebanon and they were really stopped dead in their tracks by Hezbollah. And Hezbollah, inflicted heavy losses on the IDF, and the IDF chose to retreat. It was considered something of a real embarrassment for Israel. And it was celebrated as maybe the first true victory over Israeli forces in a long, long time in the Middle East. I think it's unlikely that Hezbollah would do that. I mean, they would risk, unless it's something that they decided, that it was time to actually engage the Israelis, because they would risk, massive retaliation from Israel if they did it. I think, if Iran retaliates, I think, they have to also show that
it's from them. They're not working through the shadows. Right. They're going to do something.
Right. If that's the whole point, is to demonstrate, okay, look, we retaliated. They've got to do it themselves.
There will be a retaliation of some sort. Iran has said that, right? You said the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah, has basically ordered Iran that there will.
That's what I've heard. I think I said this morning, right?
So, but you think it will be measured, but. Doesn't matter.
Carefully calibrated.
Okay, we say carefully calibrated, but how calibrated will the Israelis feel like it is, or how measured? If Iran strikes Israel, what will be the response from Israel?
Right.
And what will be the response to the United States? Fox News is going to have a field day with this.
Right. Well, I don't know. It's going to be very difficult. They'll have to pick their target very, very carefully, because if indeed, and I believe this is true, Israel, launched a strike on the consulate because they were hoping to draw Iran into a conflict and thereby draw the U.S. into a larger conflict, then certainly any sort of strike from Iran is going to provide the Israelis with an excuse.
Right, that's what they want. They want a retaliation, even if it's a small retaliation, a measured one, even if they don't kill anybody.
Right, they'll make it out to be something major and something that Israel simply has to
defend itself, as they say.
Right. I don't know how they're going to do it, to be honest. We'll see. It'll be interesting.
I still can't understand how they can get away with it, just the hypocrisy of it. Because if they do...
Oh, well, this has been going on for decades, and it's just been intensifying in the last few months.
I guess it's because I've just become... I was aware of it to some extent before, because, I have been to Palestine and Israel before.
Right.
But just recently, just seeing things on Twitter and X and figuring out more, it's just mind-boggling to me, the sort of the mental gymnastics that the Israelis perform to continually be the victim, and they're always defending themselves. And they'll strike people on their own soil. Like a consulate is Iranian soil. That's what an embassy is, a consulate. If you step on
a very serious violation of international law, and an act of war.
It's an act of war. They're striking Iranian soil, but then Iran has no right to defend. No other country has the right to defend itself.
Oh, but that's just the nature of the of the propaganda war. I mean, it just doesn't. It really, there's no logic involved, and unfortunately, it seems to work with most people. It's not working with everybody now. We can see that there are people who are waking up to this extreme hypocrisy. But the Israelis. It seems like the Israelis have become used to be very, very good at the propaganda war. They could turn every incident, spin it and spin it and spin it until your own head is spinning, and you thought that you don't know what's up from down. But I think in recent years, and especially in recent months since October 7th, it's just that they haven't even really tried. I mean, they make us feeble efforts or half-hearted efforts to spin things now, but they don't seem to care. And now it's like the U.S. is left to try to cover up for them and their Western leaders, and often they don't even try to cover up. You'll find that they simply suppress the news. They don't report it. Like, again, this attack on the consulate, that should be huge news, huge news. The entire consulate was destroyed. These top generals were killed along with other military officials and diplomats and Syrian guards. This should have been enormous, but just nary a peep. If you just look through all the major Western media outlets, you will see, I think maybe there's one report, perhaps another thing has come out recently, but at hours from it, just one report that didn't make much of it. And same thing with, recent atrocities. Like, I noticed, for example, on Twitter, people like Craig Murray were predicting that now that these Westerners were killed by the Israelis, well, now people will make a big deal about it. They don't care about Palestinians, but they're going to care about white people from Europe and the U.S. and Australia.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, just so people know what you're talking about?
Right. It's the let's see if I get the
World
name right.
Kitchen Organization, right?
Or Center.
World Kitchen Center, right?
WKC, right. Okay. Well, this was an organization, or it is an organization that's headed by a celebrity chef, Andre, something very well known actually, and somebody who flies in high circles and has connections with the Biden administration, the State Department. This is the Democratic Party. Well, he recently got permission to distribute food, or his organization did, to distribute food in Gaza. And actually, the Biden administration supported it because, they say, they've been helping Israel to undercut the UN agency, UNRWA. And they figure, this is one of our own, right? But the Israelis are just so completely out of control. They're so cynical that they targeted these guys. There were 3 vehicles in a convoy, clearly marked, as
on the top of the roof of the car, on the sides of the car.
Right. And they were departing. Had previously informed the IDF of their itinerary.
So they tell the IDF exactly when they're leaving, where they're going. Right. So no way the IDF didn't know what this was.
And then initially they said, "Oh, this must have been a mistake. We'll look into it," but it clearly wasn't a mistake. It was all 3 vehicles were hit, and it was one vehicle after the other. It wasn't just a simultaneous strike. They took out one, and my understanding is actually like the other vehicles went back to help and got the survivors from the first attack. Then the second vehicle was struck, and then the third vehicle was struck. I mean,
Why would Israel do this? Obviously, it looks. Are they trying to scare any international organizations from providing relief or aid?
I think that's the extent that this was rational at all. I think that's it.
So that's the reasoning, you think?
I think it could be. It's just like, okay, because we want to starve these Palestinians. I mean, well, why is it that they're trying to undercut UNRWA? It's because they want to reduce food. The inflow of food into Gaza. And, I think maybe they found that it was hard to refuse permission to this Biden-connected organization, but they don't really want them in there either. The less food, the better, as far as they're concerned. That's to the extent that this was rational, that's the only reason I can think of. But it seems like, first of all, this organization really couldn't do very much. They just didn't have the organizational strength, the resources that UNRWA has, and they weren't going to ever, stop a famine there. And again, you would think that they want to maintain good relations with Biden and the U.S. at large, and this, obviously is going to do further damage to those relations as we've been saying. So it does not seem rational to me. It just seems like, people, they're just out of control. It's almost like, okay, they call us killers. Well, we'll just kill some more and just show them, this is who we are.
Right.
And I don't know how to explain it. I mean, it just...
Yeah, they killed an Australian woman, a Polish man, a Canadian U.S. citizen.
Right. I think maybe an Irish citizen as well.
Yeah, so you think, how do these countries respond? Shouldn't there, such a horrific, deliberate murder?
Right.
It's not a...
I haven't seen it. Right, I haven't really seen anything.
I heard that the ambassador of Australia...
Okay, I think that maybe he responded the most strongly.
How could that be,
right.
Like if you were, the family members of these people in your own government won't even
right.
at least call and say, hey, that's not okay. They just
right.
stay silent.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, this is not the first time this has happened. For anybody who's followed, events in Palestine over the last few decades, we've seen this happen again and again. American citizens do get killed, by Israeli soldiers.
Yeah, one was shot in the head in the West Bank a couple months ago. A teenager, 17-year-old from Louisiana. He was out barbecuing, I heard, and just
right.
shot him. Just nothing.
Yeah.
No reason.
Right. Yeah, and there was... I remember years ago there was somebody in Gaza, an American citizen, that was shot in the neck and killed by an Israeli sniper. There was, of course, Rachel Corrie, who was bulldozed to death. I think that was also in Gaza. This happens. There was an American citizen on a Turkish ship that was part of a flotilla that was trying to provide relief to Gaza. Again, this is years ago. So, I mean, people think that like Gaza's troubles only began recently, but Gaza has been suffering under the Israeli blockade for a long, long time, and he was shot and killed by Israeli forces. And then
did they just board the ship and start shooting everybody on the ship?
Right. I think there were 19 people killed.
Yeah,
and one of them was an American citizen. So yeah, this happens. I mean, this is particularly egregious, because there were several Western citizens of Western countries, and they were clearly. And right, so they were supposedly they were let in there with Israeli permission, but it's just something that we see. I mean, we've seen throughout this war. You think again and again, people are told that, for example, food is going to be distributed at this point, or so people show up, they get shot by the Israelis, right? Or okay, head south. You'll be safe if you go south. They go south and they get shot on the way, and the convoy gets bombed, or they arrive in the southern area that's supposed to be safe. Then they get bombed there. I mean, this has just been the nature. There's nothing. There's absolutely no mercy, and there just doesn't seem to be any.
I think over 130 journalists have been killed in Gaza.
Right. I think well over 100 UN employees too.
Right.
I mean, again, this just seems insane because the thing is, okay, they don't like the UN, but. What are you doing? It's just that eventually there must be just growing rage, for example, within the UN and even if these Western governments are headed by people that are true believing Zionists, underneath there must be this just a growing rumble of dissent. As people see this, they see, not just Palestinians being killed, but their comrades, their co-workers being killed.
Right. Yeah. I saw in an interview with I think it was an American doctor that was working in Gaza before. And she was saying that, when they leave the hospital, they have to put on civilian clothing because if you're wearing hospital clothing, scrubs, they are targeted. Over 800 nurses and doctors have been killed because they seem to be specifically going after journalists, aid workers, UN workers, doctors, hospitals, anybody that is trying to relieve the suffering in any way, they're actually targeted.
Right.
So this idea that IDF is one of the most moral armies is what they try to say, and that we're minimizing civilian casualties it's just such a farce. It's so blatant. If anybody does any, basic research into it, they can see it. And he said they're the masters of spin, but they're not able to spin anymore.
Yeah, right. Well, they don't, like I was saying,
they don't even try. You're saying anymore.
I think really, over the last few years, and then particularly now, it's just they've become increasingly ham-fisted. It's just like they used to be. I remember like the Israelis 20 years ago. They were good at it. They constantly lied, but they were good liars, and they were careful. I mean, it's sort of. I think we talked about this. They were very incremental. It's like, we'll just take maybe 100 acres a year or something of West Bank land.
Right.
And that'll cause some, rumblings of discontent out in the West, but then it'll settle down. Then we'll take another 100 and there'll be some rumblings. And that way, over time, eventually we'll take it all.
Slowly move the goalposts.
Yeah.
But now they just don't even care, right?
Right. Now they're going fast and they just don't seem to care. They don't seem to make an effort to cover up. Or, I mean, it's just so blatant. You have to be either stupid or it seems to me that, you've got to be complicit, just like you actually don't care. Recently, we had a Republican congressman that came out and said that they should just use the Hiroshima solution on
the Hiroshima Nagasaki solution. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think he's saying what these other people think too, is just kill them all. They just
do it quick.
Right.
And just...
right. I mean, it's other people have enough concern about their image that they, among sensitive friends or something, they don't go out and say that. But otherwise, how do you explain it? How do you just turn away from these atrocities again and again and again?
Right.
And the lies become increasingly transparent.
It just feels like a very poorly calculated move, though, for politicians to say these things or for Israel to make this move. If you care about the preservation of the state of Israel itself, if you want Israel to survive and succeed, this is clearly not the way to go about it, right? This will lead to the destruction of Israel in one way, one shape or form, I believe. I don't see how Israel can walk away from this anymore. And what's mind-boggling to me is how do the people in Israel not see it? How is there not more a larger voice within the Israeli population to say we have to stop this madness for our own preservation, for our own well-being.
Yeah.
Like you just go on Twitter or X and you see how ratioed they are in terms of likes that the Zionist post as opposed to the comments. Somebody will say, "Oh, we got to go after Hamas," and then you see the comments of people that have 10 times the amount of upvotes. Nobody's on the support side. I shouldn't say nobody, but the vast majority of the world is behind Palestine now. And I just explain it to me. Why is it just some kind of madness that has gripped the whole Israeli population, or has this been this way for a while and have all voices of sanity left and they have this massive echo chamber?
There has been a gradual trend towards, a hardline nationalist position. And you could say the peace camp in Israel has been steadily diminishing over the last few decades. I mean, it used to be real. It was always a minority, but there was, they did have actually influence on policy. And, they had people like Yitzhak Rabin who was president for a while, and I think was actually sincere about looking for some kind of solution. But that's, now I can't even remember, at least 30 years ago, something like that. It's just since then, yes, Israel has just been heading in one direction, and the dissidents have either emigrated or converted to the other side. Now we just have very, very few people. When I was there, which I think was like 13 years ago, it was already a very small minority, the number of people that were actually looking for some kind of peaceful coexistence with the Palestinians who were concerned about their rights.
Right. I remember that too.
Yeah, it was a very, very small minority. But they did exist. And now, I mean, there were organizations. It's just, now it's just, they're just completely overwhelmed or just they have become completely irrelevant to the process.
Doesn't Israel realize how dangerous this is for them?
Well, clearly they don't. They don't. I mean, otherwise, how can you explain it? Because again, I can see how you could say, I don't give a damn about Palestinians, whether any Palestinian lives or dies. That's a terrible thing to say, but I can see how somebody might have that attitude. But still, we can't just kill them all because this is,
somebody might get upset.
Yeah, right. The world will hate us, and that's not good. We can't be a pariah state. But there just doesn't seem to be that. I mean, it's just like the utter reckless disregard for any sort of world opinion and of standards of humanity, it's obvious now. They just don't care. They just have thrown all those constraints to the wind, and they're just engaged in this bloodletting orgy. I mean, which I think now is just not rational. It's just like they're killing for the sake of killing, and they're showing just to demonstrate to themselves and everyone we don't care.
Yeah, well, you said something that made sense to me. Where you said that once you have this much blood on your hands, it's hard to stop.
Right.
You have to kind of carry through. You can't admit to the horrors and atrocities that you've committed, so you have to just push on through. And I think to me, maybe that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, No, I think that's true. I think it's, you hope that there's some sort of reemergence of rationality, at least, if there's not actual compassion, because rationality would tell them, let's stop. Let's maybe take world opinion into account now. But you just don't see it. There's just this bloodlust, that's just run wild.
We've seen this throughout history before as well, where a group of people I'm thinking of the rape of Nanjing with the Japanese in China as kind of a similar thing, just kill them all, put babies on spikes, parade them through the city.
Yeah.
So is that where we're kind of experiencing the same type of thing? This sort of mass bloodlust psychosis where that grips a whole country and a whole... Yeah. Would you say that's comparable to what's happened, what the Japanese did in China, or are there any other historical parallels that you could draw on?
I mean, the rape of Nanjing, though you'd have to say that, when the rape of Nanjing happened, I don't think the people back home understood what was going on. There was some distance within it. It wasn't that the whole population was kind of part of it, but it's just I try to avoid seeing, the most disturbing images, or watching the videos of these atrocities. I really try, but you just can't help seeing certain things on on Twitter, for example, on X. And it's horrifying. I mean, and the thing too is that, a lot of these pictures, show Israeli soldiers ridiculing their victims, celebrating them. And then also you get comments from people within Israel or Zionists from around the world, they're not in any way hiding. There are those people out there saying that somehow, still claiming the IDF is waging a moral war. And it's just very unfortunate, but, civilians always suffer during wartime. We don't want this to happen, but what can you do? You see those people, but you also see a lot of comments, of people openly celebrating,
right?
And mocking the dead, right?
They're making fun of the Australian woman that was killed. I see these comments. It's what's so different about this time, like you said, the rape of Nanjing. The population at home wasn't aware of it, but what's so different here is that these atrocities are televised globally, and they're just so open about it. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Right?
How can they just be seeing, like the footage is just so awful. Like you say, I try to avoid seeing the worst footage, but it just shows up in my feed, and it just, I think so many people around the world are just caught up in this anger and helplessness, like I am too. And then I'll just leave a comment like, "This is terrible," and they're just turning the whole world. I feel like so many people are being converted, or I wouldn't say converted, or are becoming very strong anti-Zionists now. because of what's happened.
Yeah, no, there's no question that it's given a real boost to the anti-Zionist, activists, the anti-Zionist camp. I think I saw Craig Murray again from Scotland saying that, he said for years and years, we're always considered to be just cranks and kooks for complaining about the Zionists. And that's no longer true. It's just horrible that it took a genocide to wake up the world.
Right. So what will happen? Will there be any retaliation? Probably not from our Western governments. What happened with those WKC workers? People just say, oh, war's terrible, accidents happen.
Right. It'll get very little press. And then where it's mentioned, there's going to be, the typical hand-wringing and it's complicated kind of statement. And then they'll try to bury it.
I honestly think in 5 years, Israel won't be a state anymore. It will be something else. But it's just scary for me as well to think maybe the Israelis, they'll just have to evacuate at some point, or they'll have, because they can't, what's been done to them is so horrible. What I'm afraid as well is that once there is a retaliation, Israel could get wiped off. And then we have a genocide in the other direction. There's no good solution here. What's going to happen? Yeah. I think that's what's going to happen. Right. Everybody's going to flee, and the people that are left, maybe they can somehow make amends, or they'll be slaughtered in Israel. I think that's what's going to happen.
Well, it was, I certainly used to be in favor of the two-state solution. It was actually very unfair to the Palestinians. They were only getting 22% of their original land. But the Palestinian leadership had agreed to it. It seemed like the only thing that could really, the only viable, feasible solution out there. And, maybe 20, 30 years ago, it really could have happened. But, especially, after my visit to Palestine, you could see that it wasn't going to happen. And so the other solution that has been put forward is a one-state solution. It's to have Israelis and Palestinians living together in a single state. And I say at this point, that's just not possible, right? Yeah. I mean, because there's just too much hatred and anger. A lot of it justified. But it's just, I don't think that was ever a real possibility. So you just say, well, what can we do? What can we hope for? And I never really thought this until recently. It's not like my sympathies were with the Palestinians, but I understood a lot of Israelis. They were there, born in that country. How can you blame them?
It feels like they're home too.
Yeah, exactly.
Generations there now.
Right. And so, if there's a solution, they ought to be protected too. I've always felt that until recently. And it's just that it just says as a nation, it's not just like a government, but as a nation, they have become a threat to the peace of the region, of the world, and to the lives of, all these other countries around them. Maybe it is time for them, for everyone, who is a Zionist to leave, to be evacuated, to go home.
Right. Go back to New York, go back to Russia, wherever. Right. But they will be hated back there too. It's just,
so now, I've noticed other people are saying that too. And those who want to stay there are maybe the ones who, are willing and able to, work with their neighbors.
Or get slaughtered.
Yeah, or take that risk, because it's true. It's going to be hard to restrain, let's say the more violent or for hotheads from wreaking vengeance,
Yeah, it's just such. They can't even say it's short-sighted. It's just like you said, they know what they're doing and they want to do it. If you want to stop terrorism, the best way to do it is stop killing women and children. Right. That's what creates terrorists. Right. You kill someone's child, you're creating a terrorist. Right. Or maybe we would say terrorist, a resistance fighter, or
right.
It's
yeah. And then on a larger, just looking at world opinion, I mean, the Israelis are always complaining or, pointing to the so-called problem of anti-Semitism. Say if you're concerned about anti-Semitism, probably, again, the best thing to do is stop killing women and children.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's just so crazy. Okay. So Iran is going to retaliate. I have a feeling that if Israel is trying to provoke a retaliation and Iran has said they're going to retaliate, we don't know when it's going to happen, that this could be a big provocation for that. Israel say it's a huge provocation and try to start a wider regional war. Do you think that's, do you agree? Do you think that's what's going to happen?
I think that's what they're trying to do. I think that's been...
But they've also shown that they don't give a damn what people think. So even if everybody says like, oh, that's absurd. You could destroy their consulate. You bombed an Iranian consulate and killed their top generals and diplomats. And now you're upset that Iran bombed a warehouse with nobody in it. And they're going to use that as a justification to go to war. But Israel says they already show they don't care what people think about it. Right.
Well, again, also they have the Western media is still largely very much on their side, and we'll cover them just like they're covering for these recent atrocities.
But they also have to realize that it's legacy media is dying.
Yeah.
People don't believe it or trust it.
They're still
right.
Yeah, well, the thing is, see, this is what struck me is that, I mean, a lot of us have just don't waste our time with legacy media anymore. But say the power elite, that's what they still look to. That's actually, that's the legacy media is very much kind of in bed with the establishment, and they have a very incestuous relationship. So I think it's, the legacy media covers for them, and the elites, well, that's where they get their news, and they kind of believe it, in a way, it's just sort of a,
right. Well, the writing is on the wall for the legacy media and the powerful elite, but just don't know how long it takes for things to collapse. I just don't think, if you just look at just the elites in Western Europe and the United States, they have so little support. I just feel like everything's crumbling down. I think everything is falling apart. And I'm just trying to figure out what that means and when it will happen. And we know,
right.
What do I do to protect my family and my
right.
That's
there, things, I would certainly say things are falling apart, like in the Middle East and Gaza and Israel and in Ukraine. And certainly we're seeing the impact here, but these structures are still very strong. It's like, again, looking at cracks in the foundation. And you got to wonder, you say, well, this building doesn't look quite so solid as it once did, but who knows? It sometimes, because I've been struck by the absurdity of all kinds of situations, there's many times where I thought to myself, well, this can't last, and it's lasted. Just that the inertia of the old system is really something. It's a force to be reckoned with. It stays there, and it seems to resist all kinds of events, and all kinds of facts. I agree that it's just like recently. It's just that, again, it's the nature of the crisis, the obvious absurdity of all their policies and so on, has reached a new height. The crisis has deepened. But I just find myself, I find myself thinking, or I guess I say the same thing to myself. Well, maybe the whole thing's going to fall down next year. It looks like, how can this go on much
even longer? This year?
Yeah, or even this year. I find myself, but I know that I've said that in the past, and it just sometimes you don't realize how much people are kind of stuck in the old ways. Maybe the old ways or the old way of looking at the world It's been comfortable for them for so many decades. It's really hard for people, for the great majority of people, to really to wake up, to see the new reality, and to step, get out of the old rut. It's harder than I think a lot of us realize. Now, but eventually, because every order, every empire has fallen. Eventually, ours will too. And it certainly seems like we're getting close. I don't know how close, but it may last longer than seems possible.
What really scares me is the idea that Iran retaliates, strikes Israel. Israel says this is now our excuse to go full in and, I don't know, maybe into Lebanon, Syria, or start striking Iran directly. The United States gets pulled in because we got to back our closest ally, Israel.
Right.
And Russia has declared what Israel did to the Iranian consulate in Syria as a terrorist attack. I think most of the world agrees. And Russia and Iran are pretty close, have very close ties economically.
And Russia and Syria do too.
And Russia and Syria. Right. So I could see, and Russia, obviously, it feels like it's at war with the United States, essentially, because of what's happening in Ukraine. We orchestrated this whole thing in Ukraine. We know they're leveling accusations against us with the terror attack in Moscow. And it's Russia is basically, I just feel like that they're making the claim, and I would agree with them, that Israel and the United States are terrorist nations that are out of control, or sponsors of state terror, and that we could be looking at something catastrophic, a World War III situation. And it sucks being on the side where I realize, like, hey, we're the baddies. We're not the good guys in this situation. But I know a lot of people feel the same way as me and do not have any desire to go to war within Western Europe or the United States. And I just pray that if things start to go crazy and the U.S. and Israel want to go to war against Iran, and Russia looks like it's going to be drawn into, that there'll be enough people in this country that be like, no way, I am not signing up for this protest, unrest in the street. And I don't know if it's going to come to that, but that's kind of, I can see the steps there. I can make those, I can see that path.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'd say, first of all, is that I think we look actually both Russia, Iran, there's this potential for conflict with the U.S., but both countries want to avoid that. I mean, I think there's no question that they want to avoid that.
Israel doesn't want to avoid that.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. They want to avoid that at all costs. And in fact, I think it's clear that the U.S. does too. There are enough sane heads to say, no, we don't want to go to war with Russia, or even we don't want to attack Iran. I think that was, recently the decision was made that none of those missiles that were launched in response to the killing of the 3 soldiers was going to go into Iranian territory, because that could have invited retaliation, which would have been, devastating for the U.S. I think, again, the U.S. really does not want.
Then why don't we get our bases out of Iraq and Syria? These are tripwires.
Right.
Iran, once these things get out, I also think there's potential for a false flag attack where potentially Israel bombs and destroys one of our bases and blames it on Iran or Hezbollah.
Yeah.
I mean, they've done this stuff before, right? I mean, there was the USS Liberty incident.
Right. And there was the Levant affair. That was.
Can you explain those two real quick?
Okay. Well, the Levant affair occurred it was around the time of the Suez Crisis. I can't remember the exact date, but it was actually, there were Israeli soldiers that dressed up as Egyptian soldiers and launched an attack on what was it, a British, I can't remember exactly, but it was just a classic false flag, where, you always hear about false flags now, and most of the time it's not real, it's silly, but this was a case where they actually dressed up as the soldiers of the other side, but they were caught and exposed in that. Now that was in the 1950s. The details of it, escape me right now. But
it's Levant. How do you spell that?
I think it's Lavonne.
Okay.
Then Okay, but now the USS Liberty incident, that occurred during the Six-Day War in June of 1967. And it was actually a CIA surveillance ship that was some distance off the coast of Israel. I mean, it was quite a ways off the coast of Israel in the Eastern Mediterranean. Just, listening in as, intelligence ships do. And it was attacked by the Israeli Air Force. They bombed and strafed it for hours, as a matter of fact. They clearly were trying to sink it. And they would have sunk it if it wasn't for very courageous actions of some of the people on board. The Israelis, I think, knocked out the communications tower on the ship. But, one of the crew and it crawled across, under fire and was able to set up a makeshift antenna, and they were able to send an SOS. And so the U.S. Navy eventually responded. And when the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Navy sent fighters to protect the plane, and when those showed up, the Israelis flew away. But it was clear they were constantly, messaging to, signaling to the Israelis that were attacking that, we're U.S., They had the American flag. It was clear. Now, quite a few people died in that incident. It was at least 37. What was that? That's the number that comes to mind right now. And then, well over 100 were seriously injured. And it was really a miracle that the ship wasn't sunk. Now, to this day, it's not completely clear why they did that, but I think why they did that. But the best, the most convincing, the most reasonable explanation is that they were going to pin it on the Egyptians, and as a false flag, and then help to draw the Americans in, or to at least gain more sympathy from the American side.
And what did we do?
Well, this is the horrible thing. I mean, that it was Lyndon B. Johnson was president then, and he decided just to deep six the whole thing. He knew that the Israelis were behind it, but he had all kinds of, I guess, connections with Zionists within the U.S. and didn't want to jeopardize, his good relations with Israel and with domestic Zionists. So
we did nothing.
We did nothing, absolutely. And in fact, all of the surviving crew members were told to just shut up and not to say anything about it. I mean, now they're talking about it. They've been, every year, and you can hear if you poke around on the internet, you'll hear a lot of interviews with these survivors. They'll describe what happened, and every one of them says, "Yeah, Israel knew what they were doing."
Yeah, that's crazy. So a false flag attack on Israel on our own troops is definitely a real possibility in the Middle East. Would you say would you agree?
Well, you'd have to say so, yes. I mean, it's just, so that's, again, I don't think the U.S. doesn't want to be drawn in, but the problem is within the U.S., there's long been this faction that does want to go to war with Iran. And we came very close, like under George W. Bush. So again and again, we've actually come right to the edge of the precipice, but, there have been saner heads have prevailed, and we've withdrawn. But you just don't know. One of these days, the crazies might win the battles within the deep state, and we could attack Iran.
Israel. Oh boy!
Yeah.
So, and if that happens, what do you think the probability of World War III is?
Yeah,
do you think that how can the U.S. just go to war? Because war is supposed to be approved by Congress.
Yeah, and but that hasn't happened since World War II.
Right. So, they can just do whatever they want without the support of the people, right? So
yeah, maybe it was the Korean War, but it's been a long time since we've actually had a declaration.
Right. But I just don't see how they could get away with it. Can you even say that America is a democracy? How is it a democracy if, it doesn't seem like the will of the people ever gets, addressed. Nobody, they go to war, bomb whoever they want, do whatever they want. I feel like the United States, we've just slowly kind of abdicated all of our civic responsibilities to, the deep state, and they can just get
or to the executive. Or the president is not
to the executive branch, right?
Yeah, well, again, that's been a problem for a long time. It's just that Congress hasn't performed its role as kind of a watchdog, as oversight, and hasn't represented the will of the people in foreign affairs, and especially matters concerning war. So it would be nothing new if we went to war, again, without the consent of the American people through their Congress.
But such a big war. I just don't see
well,
it.
It's just the thing
if they try to do conscription, people aren't going to go.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think maybe that's right. That's going to be a problem when they come up to that. But the thing is that, like with a lot of these wars, I mean, they, just take the war in Ukraine as an example. Right, that was supposed to be. I think they actually believed that was going to be a quick war. They imposed the sanctions from hell on Russia, and then they were going to flood Ukraine with NATO weapons, and the Russian army was going to collapse. The Russian economy was going to collapse, and then Putin was going to be overthrown, and they were going to have another Western friendly regime. I think a lot of those people thought that. You're looking at now, it just seems so absurd, but it's hard to explain their actions, otherwise. And then, in Iraq too, it was going to be a cakewalk. That's the danger. It's just that they can miscalculate. They can think, okay, this will be quick, this will be easy. There are always people who are going to make those arguments, and there's always people that really overestimate the capabilities of our military. And so they could think, it's going to be a quick strike on Iran. Iran is, people think back to Iraq. This is just a third world country, and we'll teach them a quick lesson. But it isn't. That's the thing. It's just so it could happen. Again, with people who miscalculate, catastrophically. And that's the real danger.
Well, yeah, we just seem to have a very, very incompetent elite, the people that just don't think, don't understand, and it seems to be pervasive within our military as well. It's just so many miscalculations. They act like everything's a Hollywood movie. They don't seem to be able to think more than two steps. Right. I feel like these countries like Russia and Iran, they're playing chess while we're playing checkers.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, it seems like the people that are in charge, they've risen to their positions because, not because they have any real competency or they understand foreign affairs or, military hardware or whatever it is. It's just that they know how to get elected, or they know how to climb the career ladder. And then increasingly that has really nothing to do with being truly competent or, having a knowledge of the world. They're just purely political animals that respond to polls and to what they see on CNN or MSNBC.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. I think we can end it here. I think next time I want to talk to you a bit about, if the United States is just going to break apart, like what's going to happen. But I don't want to dive too deep into that right now, because I think we'll go for hours on that as well. Okay, let's stop it there. All right, thanks a lot, Dad.